Hi everyone. So as we mentioned in class yesterday, this week your primary programming assignment is going to be to create your own JSON file. Now the purpose of this exercise obviously is to get you familiar with the structure of JSON, understand a little bit more in a more hands-on way how things are organized, because it's a data format that we're going to see a lot of. And we're doing this in JSON instead of XML because JSON, frankly, is more dominant these days. As you saw in the exemplar yesterday, there are a lot of services, particularly government services, that will offer data in both XML and JSON. But particularly for working on the web, JSON is by far the more common format these days. Also, if you ever want to go on and do work with JavaScript, JSON is, you're going to see it everywhere. So it's a great format to kind of get familiar with and get comfortable with. So, to get started, as we discussed yesterday again, we can edit JSON, because JSON is just text, with any text editing program. And so we're going to use a really basic one. We're going to use text edit on the Mac to create our JSON file. Now, the first thing that I want to point out here is that if I, generally speaking, if I open up a text edit file and I go to save it, so I'm just going to click save here. The default option that comes up here is going to be .rtf. RTF is an extension that we actually didn't discuss yesterday. That stands for rich text format. And so what this is it's not as complicated as a Word document, but it supports more formatting than a plain text document, which ends in .txt. Now, anytime we're dealing with data, we want to make sure that we're working in that very plain text format, that .txt format. So, in order to do that, in most cases, we're going to have to specify to the program, because it assumes that we want to write a document and not necessarily work in code. We're going to have to specify that what we want is actually that plain .txt format. So to do that, I'm going to choose format from the text edit menu, and I'm going to use the command there called make plain text. I could also do this with a keyboard shortcut. As you get more familiar with this, you may prefer that. So now, the main thing that this is going to do is it's going to make sure that I don't end up with things like curly quotes. Curly quotes will block correct interpretation of any JSON files you create. That's the best way that I can describe it. And we can talk about more about why that's the case in class if any of you have questions about those specifically. So as I mentioned, what we're going to do is, what each of us is going to do this week is we're going to make a list of items in our lives. And so the first place that we're going to start with this is just to make it clear that what we're working on is JSON, and of course to do that we are going to use curly braces. I'm going to go ahead actually, now that I think of it, and I'm going to pump up the font size here so it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to start with curly braces. Now the thing to note here is that anytime we have a brace that opens, we need to have a brace that closes, right? It needs to be balanced. Where there is a left open brace, there needs to be a right close brace. So you're going to see me using this approach a lot, which is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the braces balanced, and then I'm going to go back and fill in the information that belongs in them. And the reason for this is simply that it's just easier to keep track and make sure that I have all of the correct braces that way. It's just a simple way to avoid errors. Basically. So I'm going to start out with this, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name my object, right? So I want to make this descriptive. This is the other thing about JSON and XML is that they have the opportunity to be very descriptive. Now, as we saw in the example yesterday of that water gauge information, they're not always very descriptive. And what does that mean? Well, it actually means that it's just a real pain for anybody who doesn't have access to you, right, who can't call you up and say, by the way, what does V mean? It makes it very difficult for them to understand what the data is about, what it describes. And so for that reason, anytime we're creating our own data sets, we want to be very mindful of that and try to create descriptive names for our fields or our so-called key value pairs. In JSON, if you're ever doing this in XML, the same thing goes. We want people to be able to look at this file and pretty much understand what's in it without having to somehow track us down and ask us about it. So I'm going to start really basic here. I'm going to call this item list. Now you notice that, so my key, anything that's on the left of the colon is the key. Anything that's on the right is the value, okay? So my main object here is an item list. And I want to add some, what I'm going to call metadata to this list, right? So I'm going to call it, I'm going to say this is going to be I'm going to call this, again, I want to be as descriptive as possible. Item type, in my case, is going to be books. Okay. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to say owner, right? And I'm going to put in my uni. Okay. So this is a great piece of metadata, right? Oops, that's not my uni. Because right off the bat, you know what type of thing is in the list. And you know who created it, right? Now, things to point out here, every one of these, everything that is like, that is a string, right? That's a combination of words, is surrounded in double quotes, right? We notice that on both the right and the left. When I have more than one thing, and I'm missing something. See, I'm missing something already. We'll come back to that. Is when there's more than one thing, we separate them with commas. Okay, so JSON you can actually think of as being a kind of comma-separated value file. So what is the thing that I'm missing here, and how can I check this? Well, I'm pretty certain that one of the things that I'm missing is curly braces here. Okay, and the reason why is because I can essentially have only one thing on the right-hand side of any colon, okay? And the way that you can think of it is that curly braces it's a way of drawing a circle around a collection of items, right? So because I can only have one thing on the right side, if I want to actually have more than one thing, I need to wrap them in curly braces, right? That draws a circle around the things inside of it, right, that are between those curly braces, and says, this is all one thing. So how can I test this? I am going to start, I'm not done yet by any means, but I'm going to start to test this by taking it over to JSON lint. And I strongly recommend that you all approach these tasks this way, which is to say that you start out by, oops, I'm going to use this window actually, which is that you start out very basic, right? I do this all the time. Start out with a really simple thing, okay? And then test it, right? Change, test, change, test, change, test. The beauty of this is that you can know very easily where things went wrong, and it's nothing but an Apple Z, right, or an undo command to get back to something that works. Okay, so here we are. I have entered this, and I'm going to come down here and click Validate JSON, and happily I get this green message that says it's valid JSON. It's also done some nice formatting for me here. Formatting is important. It helps with the readability of my JSON, of my data, and in that formatting elucidates the structure, okay? So just the same way that we have a headline and paragraph breaks and subheads and things like that, the indentation pattern in a JSON file or an XML file, right, actually helps us read and understand what's in it. So I can actually continue working right in JSON lint. I don't have to go back to my text file. You all will obviously have to submit this as a text file, as a fixed file, so we'll flip back to that before we're done. But now I'm going to go ahead and create my list, okay? So here we go. I'm going to say, okay, here is the, I'm going to call this list items, okay? Now, when I want to create a list of things, the way that I do that is I use square brackets, okay? So anytime I have a list, I indicate that list inside the JSON by using square brackets. So what that means is it's now, I'm going to validate again just to make sure. So right now there's no items in my list, right? But let's say I wanted to add a book, right? Now, so a book is going to have a few different, each book I'm going to need maybe title and author, okay? So again, I'm going to have a list of objects, right? Each one of these is a book. Okay, but again, nothing in them. Now you notice I always liken this to English. So imagine I have a list of things at the end of an English sentence, right? I would say red, orange, green, yellow, blue, violet, right? I have a comma between every one of those items, but I don't have a comma at the end, right? So same thing here. I have 3 items, three objects, each of which is going to have, in my case, a book in it. And I separate them with commas, but I don't put a comma after the last one. And I check here again, things are looking good. And so now I'm going to just start filling in, right, my elements. So I'm actually not going to put real data in this right now, but I'm going to say book name 1, or actually I'm just going to say book name, right, and Again, so you notice how I'm even pairing the quotes first. I'm putting in 2 sets of quotes, and then I'm moving back to fill in the value. So I'm going to say book name, title 1, okay? And now in here, right? So similar to the way that I have it here, I'm going to have in each of these items, I'm going to have, I actually like to have this down here. I'm going to have the book name and the title, right? So I'm going to have a property or a key called book name, and then I'm going to have an author key, and I'm going to fill in author 1, right? It's okay for me to have spaces in things as long as they're surrounded by quotes. In general, I prefer to avoid having spaces in anything that is on the left side of that colon. Okay, those are called keys. The reason why is that different operating systems interpret spaces differently, okay? And so spaces also kind of operate weirdly on the internet. And so I prefer to use dashes or underscores when I want to have two separate words to describe something, right? So it's just a nice way to make it still pretty readable and descriptive, but not actually have spaces in it. So again, I'm just going to check that this is valid. And you can see as I fill this in, again, JSON lint is going to actually fill this stuff in for me and do the formatting. And so same thing here. I'm going to say book name, right, author, or title 2, right? So obviously you would fill these in with real values. And then I'm going to say author, and author 2, right, and so on and so forth. Now, I have a couple options here, right? I could continue to write these in by hand. I could also just copy this element, right, okay, and just change the values. Now, you'll notice, I think, that the keys for each of these items are the same, right? So I have list items, which is a list, and we know it's a list because of these square brackets. I have used the same keys, book name and author, in each item in the list, okay? And that's kind of what makes it a list. We use a list when we have things that are the same type of thing, right? We use individual keys or objects when we have things that are of a different type. So item type is distinct from owner, right? And there's only one of those in this entire document. There's only one item type and only one owner, right? So it makes sense that I would have those as just independent key value pairs. But when it comes to list items, well, I'm going to naturally, because it's a list, have multiples of them. And so I'm going to use these square brackets, and I want to use the same key within each of the objects in that list, because down the road when I'm trying to access this data, right, what am I going to want to do? Well, I'm going to want the ability to say, for example, give me the names of all the books in this list, right? Give me every book name value, right? So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. Again, I'm going to validate my JSON here, right? And you all are going to do the same thing. I think you'll get the hang of it from here. So you're going to tell me you're going to obviously modify your file to say what kind of item it is. You'll add your information there, and you will create the elements in that list to match the type of item that you have. So I look forward to seeing all of your files on Friday. Of course, if you have any questions, please do come to office hours or post questions to Piazza. The specifics about what needs to be in your file are posted in the assignment. All right, see you all next week.